Hey neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install GoPower's Solar Elite RV charging system here on our 2024 Jayco Jay Feather Travel trailer. So our neighbor today came to us in need of a way to power items in his trailer while he's at campsites throughout America that don't have any shore power. They do have a generator that they bring along with them, but there's a lot of campsites and some states where you're just not allowed to use a generator. So that's where having a solar panel and an inverter setup is going to be the way to accomplish that. So this kit comes with 2 solar panels, which is going to give you about 400 watts when you're in peak conditions. Now peak conditions are going to be sun facing right down onto your panels, and typically you're not going to get that in most states, and you're also not going to get that for a full 8 hours. But you can still get a little bit of a charge even though the sun might not be perfectly hitting your panels. Now that does equate out to about 20 amps max. Now with our neighbor already having a panel, he's got an extra 200 watts that he's adding on to that, and he is bringing in about 30 amps in peak conditions. The inverter that does come with this kit is a 2000 watt inverter. It's a little bit larger than your typical inverter that you'd see in most cases. Usually it's about 1000. Now with that, you'll be able to run the microwave, some outlets, maybe a couple other AC appliances, but it is a case where you're going to have to make sure that each one of these items isn't going to go over that 2000 watt requirement there. So if you are trying to run your AC, you probably will not be able to do it for very long unless you have a very large battery bank. Our neighbor today has 2 280 amp hour battery packs, so he's not really going to have a huge problem. He'll be able to run his AC for a little bit. Now if he's wanting to run it for an extended period of time, he might want to look into switching over to a Furrion Chill Cube, which has a much lower amperage draw, so it's not going to drain those batteries nearly as quick as our current setup would with the Furrion Chill HE. Now this is a huge install. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of electrical knowledge that you're going to have to do this. So if you don't feel comfortable or you just don't have the tools or the wheelhouse of knowledge to handle all of this, please feel free to use our dealer locator. They'll help you find a shop near you and they'll get this installed for you. If you are planning on installing this, stick around. We're about to switch right over to the install and show you how we got to put in. So to start our installation, we want to first get up on our roof. I've already got my solar panels up here. They're pretty light, so with the second set of hands, you could get up on the roof, have someone hand it to you. Make sure that you either keep it in the cardboard, and then anytime that you are working with these, make sure you're wearing some gloves because the oils in your fingers can actually ruin your panels, and then you're going to have less wattage running through them and recharging your battery. So I've already kind of played with this and mocked it up how I kind of want it. Each one of these has about 1.5 to 2 feet of wire already with it, so I typically try to get it anywhere where the entry plate is, which since there's already a factory solar panel with an entry plate here, that's going to make our installation a whole lot easier because I can just disconnect this panel, pop in a splitter, and then we can run them all together. And keeping it a lot closer is going to mean you have to spend a lot less money on wiring because this is going to be a higher gauge wire, so it can get pretty expensive depending on how you do it. If you did want to have more room, so in my case, I've got probably about a good foot of space between our ladder up and where I'm going to mount the panel. I typically would want to have more space, but I can easily kind of get by. It shouldn't be an issue. And I really wanted to kind of keep it in more towards the center of our trailer. So originally I was going to put it in front, but we have 2 vents that would kind of push it right to the edge. And what you can typically find on the edge of your camper is if you're in a campsite that has a lot of trees and they're not really keeping up with it maintenance-wise, or maybe you're just pulling through your neighborhood and your neighbors aren't cutting back those tree branches, you're going to have a whole lot of scratches alongside and up top. So I try to typically keep it in more towards the center. Obviously things are going to be different on your trailer. There might be different roof vents, there might be more ACs or other stuff that can kind of be in your way, so you will have to kind of sit there and plan it all out. But with that being said, I am going to get these mounted because we want to make sure that we have as much time as we can for that self-leveling sealant to dry out because we have a rainstorm coming up. So before we send our trailer out, I want to make sure that that's fully cured. So it's real easy to just slap these in place and run that sealant over it first. So just to give you a rundown of how we're going to mount up our panels, your kit is going to include these brackets. It's going to have 2 holes for some screws to run through the ceiling, which are also provided in this kit.
It's also going to have a couple of nuts and bolts and some flat washers. So when we do this, we'll put a flat washer on our bolt, we'll have our bracket, and that slotted hole is what's going to go with our panel. We'll pop that up into there, and then on the panel side of this, we're also going to drop down another flat washer and then a nut. And we'll just tighten those down. You're not torquing this or anything, you're just going to get it nice and snug. Once we have all of 4 of them on, I'm also going to come back, I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to put butyl tape, which you can also pick up here. eTrailer and is not included with your kit. What this does is it will sit up there and it's going to seal up that hole. So as we drill those screws through, you're going to see it start to kind of blow out, and it kind of wraps itself around all those threads. Makes a nice waterproof seal when we're going down into our roof. That way we don't have anything leaking through. And then once all of that is complete and we have it stuck down to the roof, we've run our screws through, we'll come back with some self-leveling sealant, which you can also pick up here and is also not included in your kit. And we'll just kind of completely cover that all up. That way there's no chance of any water getting through. You're going to have 4 holes in your panel. So I find this one. And you're going to want to make sure that you put your leg on the outside. That way you can actually get to it and screw it down. If you're in a super tight clearance position, you could just mount the bracket first, have it flipped inside, and then get under there, hopefully with your hands, and get that tightened down. That's worst case scenario though. For the most part, every application should pretty much have this facing out. And I like to just butt it right up to the bracket of our panel right here. That way I know everything is nice and even. And I'm just doing this with an 11mm socket wrench and then also an 11mm ratcheting wrench just to get it in there and get that nut fully tightened down. So I did end up taking my gloves off just to kind of make this easier. If you don't have another set of gloves with you, make sure that you're only grabbing it by the casing on the side. That way you don't end up getting any oil on the face of the panel. Now with all 4 of these bolted on, we can put some butyl tape on and have these ready to mount to our roof. For the butyl tape, I like to take a razor knife, or if you have just a set of scissors, honestly, and just kind of cut out your chunk that you need and slap it right on there, kind of press down a little bit, get it into those holes for the mounting screws, and we'll just keep working our way along. With our butyl tape in place, I'm going to flip it over now, and we're going to need to be pretty careful. We want to have this right where we want it, because that butyl tape's going to stick right down. Since I don't have the backing paper on my butyl tape because of how I cut it, I'm making sure I don't have this fully sticking down yet. But I have cut off the little zip ties that are on our cables because I want to make sure I can get to it. Once we put our screws in, it's going to be real hard to get our hand in there. So, and with the way I want to route it, I'm probably going to keep it above our bracket here, give it a little bit more room to kind of work around. Now, depending on your situation, you might need to kind of have that bracket just to kind of help hold it, which honestly might not be a bad idea. I'll probably keep it behind there. So one of the things when you set this down, you have all your wiring ran, you want to make sure that you kind of run over it. I usually like to zip tie a lot of our wiring together, keep it nice and tight, and then I'll run some sealant over it. And that kind of helps keep the cables from just sitting there whacking the roof of the trailer as wind's going through it when you're driving around town. Now, using our included Phillips head screws, we're going to run those down through those 2 holes in our mounting brackets. And there's going to be 2 per mounting bracket. Butyl tape will start coming up around our screw, and that's helped sealing in all those threads, and it also start to kind of stick out as you compress down that bracket. With all of our mounting screws in, we're just going to repeat the same process with our other panel. With all of our panels mounted, we can throw our sealant on. I've cut a pretty good opening on our tube just because we're going to glob this on here really good. So we can just start piling it on. We want it right over those screws. And then I kind of like to come around over the bracket as well. And now with this being self-leveling, it's not going to sit there in that giant pile that we have. It's going to kind of slowly flow out and spread more all around our bracket. So we'll just keep going around to each one and get them nice and covered up. Now we have all of our panels mounted and we're giving that sealant a chance to cure, we can figure out how we're going to run everything. Now with this already having a panel set up with a 30 amp controller, we aren't going to have to install this today, but if our neighbor ever wanted to increase the amount of panels that he has on his roof, he would either need to add on the one that came with his kit, or he could go with a larger, like 60 amp or something like that, whatever's available to you that's going to be able to handle all of those extra panels. So when you're doing this, make sure that you're checking your charge controller. Typically with Go Power, they will always say it right at the top, right there on the front of it, letting you know exactly what this is rated for. Make sure that you're not overloading your charge controller by adding on too many panels. So normally the first step of our installation is going to be mounting the actual IC2000 unit, that main unit that you have here. To do that, we are going to be connecting to our batteries, but since our neighbor bought new batteries and they're wanting them moved inside of the trailer, I'm going to have to disconnect his current setup, and I'm going to yank all of this wire back until we can get it onto the undercarriage over here, and then I'm going to reroute it up into the trailer where our new batteries sit. So for our 110 volt section here, we are going to be pulling out our power center because we are going to have to pull the wire that runs from our shore power connector at the back of the trailer all the way over to our IC2000, which is getting mounted in here. Now the wire that we have isn't going to be long enough to make the journey down into the underbelly over the 2 to 3 feet that we need it, and then back up and plug in. So I am going to have to install a junction box. This isn't something that comes with your kit. This is something you'll have to do separate. If you do end up running into that kind of situation, and some other installs, you typically need to also have a transfer switch in here, but with ours, we're not going to use it. So usually that's where we kind of luck out and you can move your stuff around without it being a big deal. For us, you'll see me in just a bit put that junction box in and then get our wiring swapped over so that we can run it out over to our main unit. To get this out, we are going to be disconnecting the main. I've already loosened that up so we can see. Typically on most power centers, even if it is a different brand than what we're showing here, it's usually got its own spot. You can see right here it's coming through. We'll just loosen up all the little screws we have, mounting it into the bus bars and into our circuit breaker. And then we can use a flathead screwdriver to kind of pull back, because there's little teeth in there that bite onto the wire so that it can't move around, just in case anything kind of starts moving around when the trailer is out on the road. But we'll loosen that up, get those wires out, and get the main wire back out of here. I like to kind of press up on one of the tabs while pressing against a different tab with my flathead. That way it kind of releases and you can pull it out the rest of the way. So I have my junction box in place, and I've got my wire, my 10-2 wire running down through the floor, and that's going to run over to our IC2000. So I ran into a few issues. We have the water tank right under us, so I can't drill straight down. So I ended up taking out this drawer to my left here, and on the very, very edge, way in the back behind this vent ductwork, we have a hole back there, and I was able to fish it over and get it down through there, so that way we can run it through the underbelly over to our main unit. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing the 110 side of this, please reach out to a local electrician. This is following the same code that you'd use in a residential setting, so they should be able to easily put in that junction box for you and have everything ready to go. Now I'm going to drill a hole through the floor, and this is where my 110 wiring is going to come up and meet with our main unit. Now that I've ran it through once, and that's going to be from our shore power over to the IC2000, I'll leave a little bit extra and then cut it off. then we're going to have to do this one more time for the output, which is going to run between the IC2000 over to the main power center here. Now, to avoid any confusion, I've put some painter's tape on here, and I'm just writing input, output. That way I don't mix up any of my wires later on when we go to connect them into the main unit.
Alright, so now we have all of our wiring ran over that we need. I have all the AC and DC stuff kind of set up how I want it. I've built up some blocks basically to mount the battery so that they can't slide around. They're not going to move at all. And I kind of mocked around how I wanted everything to sit. I've already gone and made some spacers because technically you're not supposed to mount this to anything that's combustible. And with wood being combustible, we don't really want to mount to it. So, and on top of that, that's going to give us about an inch of airflow below it. The big thing with these units is if you have it in a tight, cramped space like this under your bed, and then you're generating heat on top of it as well, it's just going to overheat the unit, and then you're going to have no power to your whole trailer. So I've added in a vent fan. I've added in multiple vents in our box here, and that right there is just going to exhaust all that air out into the pass-through that we have in front of here. So that way we can keep it nice and cool, and it even has a little temperature sensor, so that way whenever we flip the little switch on that I put in and it hits up to 100 degrees, it'll kick back on, and it's going to help cool this down to 80 degrees before it'll kick back off. So if you want to pick this up, we offer this too. This is a Valterra RV fridge vent. Now there are a lot of other options you could go with. This was just the easiest one that was going to really work with us for our situation today. So if that one is maybe a little bit too bulky, you can find another 12-volt fan and pop that in just to kind of exhaust all that stale air. Now with our DC side here, I also picked up a bus bar so that I can ground everything. I've got my ground going out to my chassis. I've got a ground going to my batteries, which I'm also going to parallel as well. And I'll show you that in just a bit. And then we also have our communication wire, which is going to plug into our main unit, and then that's going to go to our monitor. Now, I am going to put that in a different spot than what I was originally wanting to, just because as I started getting into the walls here, it just kind of blocked off. The only way I'd really be able to pop out the wall that's next to our solar controller would be to actually just pull the whole panel, and it's not really worth doing all that. So I'm going to come back over, and I pulled our power center back out, and I'm going to put it up above that since I do have access to that. So big thing with these installs is you might have to pivot. So try and have a plan, but be ready to make adjustments as needed. So with all that said, let's mount up our main unit to our rails that I put in for it to mount to. And if you're doing this at home, all I did is, this is just aluminum. You could use steel, anything else, kind of metal that's gonna not be combustible. I set it on here, I colored in the little holes and drilled them out, so that way when I come back with the self-tapper, I can just shoot it right through and it shouldn't be a problem. I also drilled out larger holes in the middle so that I could put some screws down into our base right here to mount these so that they can't move at all. But with that said, we'll get this on. And now all I have to do is just line up my holes and start shooting the screws through. The next thing we're going to mount up after our unit is our fuse. So for this, if you just squeeze the sides, you can pop the casing right out. And there's going to be 4 holes. I've already kind of marked where I have a stud, so I can shoot right into that and know that I'm actually hitting something solid here. And we'll get that set, and then we can start making our connections with all of our cables. It's a lot easier if you have all this kind of figured out, because in the kit they just give you one really, really long cable, and then you have to cut it into sections to make all of your connections. So, like I said, I mocked this up, that way I can make sure I'm actually going to meet it, no problem. You also really don't want to have a super long length, so trying to keep everything really kind of tight together is going to be the right idea here. But we'll get that mounted. Oops. So now I'm gonna make my connection to my fuse. So I just used the ring terminal that's already on there. I've cut down my length. Now when you're cutting this, you can use a reciprocating saw. That's probably gonna be the quickest way to get through it, but you run the risk of mangling it up. So if you do that, make sure that you are being careful with it. I have it clamped on both ends away from where I was cutting. That way I could get a nice straight cut on it. If you don't have that, a big set of bolt cutters will also work as well to kind of get through that thick wire that they give you. But we will pop this on to our positive side. And that's going to have a flat washer, split lock washer, and a nut. And you'll want to have this facing straight down because they also give you a little cover that's going to go over this. Got that right here. And when you pop that on, it'll help protect it so that there's nothing that can potentially touch that. And it's got 4 little screws that'll help hold it in. But we'll tighten that down with a 10mm socket. So on the other end, we're going to cut back about 1 inch of the casing so that way we can expose our wire. We'll pass it into our fuse. And then we're going to tighten this down with a 5/16 hex bit. I can line it up. There we go. If you have some silver solder and you can dip that in there, that would be even better. That way you get a nice, strong kind of grip on it. Alright. You know that's not going anywhere. Now the next side I'm going to leave off right now. We're going to get our negatives and we're going to parallel our batteries real quick. I've already got some cables already made up, so with this too, we are going to have to put one side, so one of our batteries is going to get our power, and then the other battery is going to get our negative. So when I connect my negative cable from our main unit, I'm going to go to this battery and power to this one just because that's going to be my shortest run here. So with our negative battery cable, I've already cut it down to the length I want. They include ring terminals in your kit, but they don't include heat shrink, so what you'll probably need to do is just take some electrical tape once we have this crimped down and just seal that up nice and tight. While you're getting this on here though, I like to kind of twist it, and you might have to kind of play with it a bit. A lot of these try to spread out as soon as you cut it, so it can be hard to get everything into that ring terminal. You may even need to, if you didn't get a nice straight cut, just kind of come back and clean that up. If you're still struggling, like I was with this, it really just didn't want to cooperate, you can put a zip tie on real tight at the base, and what I do is I kind of spin it and twist it as I'm kind of pulling it off, and that'll give you a tighter fit here so that you can get that ring terminal started. And then once you have it started, you can just cut the zip tie. Twist that on. We can spin that down more. Yeah, we still got some stragglers though. If you do, just kind of try and twist those around it, and you can sometimes slip them in a little bit still. There we go. A lot cleaner now, and we can crimp this down. We have this little anvil style press here that we're going to be using, and we'll lift up with that. We'll just hammer this in. And like I said, you can just come back with some electrical tape. Now we know that's on there nice and tight, and just clean that up. Now we can put on our negative battery cable. And once again, you're going to have a flat washer, a split lock washer, and then a nut.
fully tighten it down once we that. Over on this side, have it so that my ring terminal should sit pretty flat with this. And we can put that right in place. From there, we can also connect our ground. So at the AC side of our inputs here, so down here we have our ground connection. So that's what we're going to put to our chassis. So I have this bus bar where I've already ran down to the chassis with the wire that they already had in place before with the old setup. So on a boat, they're typically telling you to use this guy right here. You would pop a ring terminal onto that and then put that nut back down. We're just going to use bare wire and connect from here over to our bus bar. So we'll unscrew this. Get our wire in. I've already cut down a length. Now I'm just going with 10 gauge wire. We're only passing 30 amps through this, so this should be more than adequate. If you want to go with a higher gauge, that's totally fine. Better to be safe than sorry. But we'll tighten this down. And then over on our bus bar, we'll do the same thing. Now with my input all ready to go here, I've cut out the casing about 5 inches. That way we have enough room to work, because the ground lug, which is going to be the same as what's out here, there's 2 of them inside, one for your AC input and AC output. Those are right at the beginning, and then we have this terminal block right here, which is going to have our inputs and outputs. So that's going to be your positive and neutral. If we look at it from the top down, number 1 would be our AC in. Number 2 would be that second power leg. So if you had 50 amp service, you'd have 2 power legs, so you'd have 1 and 2. For our case, we just have 30 amp service, so I'm going to be putting the black wire into that first terminal. The second terminal, I'm going to leave empty. The third terminal is going to be my neutral, so that's going to be that white wire. And then the ground is going to be right over there, like I was saying. Below that, the second set we have here is going to be our output 1, output 2. So if you had 2 power legs, 1 and 2, and then the neutral all the way at the bottom there for our output. So it's kind of tight spacing, so it is going to be hard to see. I might just kind of get this in and give you guys a picture with a smaller camera, so that way you can actually see what it looks like when it's all done. But pretty simple, just slide this in. Depending on your mounting location, you might not really even have an issue trying to see into it. But we'll get these all ready. And then once we have them in, each of these has a just little flathead screw in it, so you can use that to kind of get through. Now you will need something a little skinnier though. I've got this little guy just because I'm in tight quarters. I can't really get a good screwdriver in there, but real small tip is what you're looking for here. And then once you have all of that nice and snug down, you can come back to the outside here, and this, you could use a square bit, you could use a Phillips head or a flathead, and you just want to clamp that down nice and tight so that way the wire can't wiggle around. So here it is all wired up. I'm just going to roll through it one more time. The first 3 ports that we have right here are going to be for our input. The bottom 3 are going to be for our output. I've got the black wire, which is my hot leg, running to that top one. Number 3 is my neutral for my input. 4 down here is going to be the input or output, hot leg, and then 6 is our output neutral. And then both grounds are grounded down right over here. So with that all done, we can pop our cover plate back on. That's this guy right here, and it's got 2 screws on the top and 1 on the bottom that you're going to put in. So now we're at a point where we can start finishing up all of our connections. So starting out, I'll just parallel over from our positive here, and we can do that to our negative. Now on my negative cable, I'm going to have the one that runs to our unit on the top, or I guess I should say on the bottom. I'll have that over our parallel one. They are pretty specific about wanting it to be touching the terminal, so it's getting the best connection it can. So we'll tighten that down just a bit. We will get this one off. to parallel, if you've never done that before, you're going to go negative to negative, positive to positive. If you mix that up and you go negative to positive, that's where you're wiring in series, and that increases the voltage, and is not what we want to do, because then you're going to immediately get an error. So pop that up. Oh, and I'm doing exactly what I said I didn't want to do. I want to put that down first, then my parallel cable, and then we're going to have a washer, a flat one, a split lock, and then our actual bolt. It might be different on your battery pack. Just kind of depends, depending on the brand. Tighten that up a bit. And then over on this side, I'm also going to have a battery temperature sensor. So I'm going to place that one on here. And that's this little guy right here. And that just plugs in to a port over on our unit. So we want to go into the battery temp port. Goes that way. There we go. So this cable that I just took off is running over to our bus bar for our ground. So it's always good to have a ground going out to your chassis. I'm going to place that. Might be better to place that on top, just to have everything sit nice and flat. And I might even use one of the spare washers they give us, just because that guy right there is a little roughed up. Kind of put a space between it. And we can start tightening that down. And what this battery sensor does is it's going to monitor the temperature, so that way it's sending the correct amount of voltage. Whether it's too hot or too cold, that can affect the lifespan of your battery and how many times it can really recharge itself. So that's basically called your life cycle. And if you're not properly charging your batteries, especially when it comes to lithium ones, you could shorten that life cycle down, and then kind of makes it useless. I forgot we do need to add on our parallel. So I'm going to pop that off one more time. Yeah. This is where it can kind of get tricky. There are other options if you're having a hard time getting that bolt in. There are extensions you can get and make this a little bit cleaner. But I think we're good to go with that. Tighten it down. Now over on our other side, we can connect our power. So we do have this that we still need to put into our fuse. So I have the bare end. So on that length of wire that they give you for the positive, you're going to have a ring terminal on either side. I used the ring terminal from one side when we made our connection between the unit and then the fuse. And then on the other side, I just cut off the space between it just to get it down to what I needed. So that way I could just reuse that other ring terminal that they give you without having to crimp one on. We'll slip our wiring in, and with this you got to be a little bit careful. Sometimes it's easier just kind of twist it a little bit. We don't want any little loose wires kind of sticking out. There we go. Tighten that down. Then we can come over to our battery, and this one we are going to place right down onto it, and then our parallel I'm going to go over the top with. Alright, now that we've made our connections, we can come back to the unit, and I'm going to pop these on so that we have those nice and protected. Yeah, I forgot to also add on this. Once you kind of get all these wires going, it's real easy to misplace something. So this right here is running out to my main panel, and this is providing positive to all of our DC appliances. And at this point, I think I'm going to have to go with a longer bolt. So we'll have to pull this off and figure out what thread size this is. If you run into an issue like that, definitely go and look for a extension. We offer a few options here, and then also you can get a longer stud to screw down into there, so that way you can actually get all your connections. If you don't want to do that, you can also get a larger bus bar. So like the DC side here, you can get one rated for that amount of amperage that you're going to be putting through. That can make it a little bit easier, because then you're just putting everything in, slotting it in, and then running over one wire to it. But
with this setup, it is a little bit more, just because there's such a huge gauge of wire going on here. So now we have all of our connections made, we are going to mount and connect our remote. And this is what allows you to control the unit, run diagnostics, check everything, change your battery type, all that jazz right on here. Typically they'll give you a little piece of cardboard around this. I didn't have that in the box this time. So if you don't, an easy way to make a template is just take some painter's tape, and if you butt it up to the part that we have to cut out and make a couple of connections there with some more tape. You might need a couple set of hands just doing this, but let me give you a little idea of what I'm talking about. If I have this all the way butted up, I can then run another piece around each edge, and then when I go to stick it on the wall, I'll know exactly how I'll need to cut it. Alright, now that we have this ready, I can just pull it right off and I can stick it right on the wall right where I need it, and I know here's my box that I need to cut out. So it makes it a whole lot easier when you're trying to do this without having to draw on the wall. I'm double checking, making sure that this little sliding door can't get anywhere near it, so it's not going to interfere with the door. There's nothing else in the way. I did just kind of stick this on here, eyeballing it, but I've got a level now. We can match it right up, and we're sitting right in the center, so we know we're good. We can cut this hole out. I'm just going to use an oscillating saw. You could use a knife if you really wanted to, like a box cutter or something like that. It's going to be typically plywood here, just about a 1/4 inch, maybe even less than that, depending on the manufacturer. So it's not really hard to cut through this. The oscillating saw is going to be the easiest way though. And with all the wires that they typically run through the wall, oscillating saw is a little bit safer because you have less of a chance, because it needs tension on it so that it can actually cut. If you don't have that tension, it'll just kind of keep kicking those wires away so you don't actually cut them. Now that I've cut it out, we'll do a little test fit, and you might need to trim out just a tiny bit more if you didn't get that template just perfect, but no big deal there. It's pretty easy to cut through and kind of clean up afterwards. With that fitting, we can now hook in our cable, which I've snuck through with all my other wiring down behind our power center, just because that was really the only option to get through. From there, I'm going to snake this up, we'll plug it right in, and then the other side I have all bundled up sitting over by our main unit, and I'll show you exactly where to plug that in over there. Now I got it snaked up, we'll pop that right into place. We can push our remote into place. Actually, before we do that, let's pull our tape off. And then we can push it in, and there's going to be 4 screws in your kit that you can use to pop that in, but real quick we'll show you the other side with the main unit right here. We can plug in our other side of our connector, and we'll just pop that right into the remote port on our main unit. Alright, so since this is a 2-panel kit, but we're going to be adding on the original one that was on here, we had to switch from the 2 splice-in tree connectors here, these branch circuits, to a 3, and I'm going to get all of my panels to all come to these 3 spots, and then I'm going to run an extension, which was included with the kit, over to our entry plate. Now if you already have one on here, if it's been on for a while, you might need to get a screwdriver, because sometimes this kind of starts to get real stiff and you can't get the tabs to compress enough to get it to pop out. But there's usually 2 tabs right on the sides. We can pop it right out. Typically it's always the positive for me that's a fight, but with this being only a year old, pretty easy to get that out of there. So we'll come back over, and now these are directional. You want to make sure that you're putting all your inputs on the 3 side and your output is that single side. If you mix and match it, you're going to have issues. It's going to start giving you errors down on the monitor. So for this one, where it's all female connectors, we're going to put all of our male, and I typically try to guide it so that all 3 are kind of sitting nice and flush. So I'll probably put my original one in the center, and then the new ones on the outside, and those just click right in. And then the same thing with our negative cables. This one I'm gonna need to go with the furthest one first. We'll click that in. That one was kind of fighting me. Really make sure that you're getting a full click in, that it's fully compressing in. There's a little red rubber band, basically, that gasket, and that kind of fights you a little bit. So
pull that. Here's my extension that I have. Another extension. I think we'll come back with this. I'd already kind of sealed that down, but we ended up having to rip it up just a bit just to make this work. And I might even swap this back out. So this is where that flathead screwdriver might come into play here. If you do have to take these out and they're fighting you, push in as you're compressing those tabs, and then you can work it fully out. Now I can put that in the center, have this meet up, and then our final connector. I'm going to have to try and angle this so that these can sit nice, because I'm also going to come back. And what I like to do is there's 2 screw holes so that you can actually screw these down to this roof. And I'll usually build up butyl tape in between the 2 spots just because there's a bit of a gap here. And then I'll stick that down, run some screws through it, and then I'll go over it with more self-leveling sealant. And then I also go over any cables that are loose so that way they're not flapping around in the wind. But we can add on our extensions and complete our setup here. All right, so I'm using the butyl tape now, and I'm just ripping off about an inch and a half's worth and kind of rolling it just to fill in that gap. Then I have some self-tapping screws, and I'm just going to run those through the mounting holes into our roof. And then from there, we'll come back with our self-leveling sealant, and we're just going to give a nice, healthy glob all over this. Prevent any water from leaking in. You can leave it, though, so that you can still get that connector off. Just in case, maybe if you add an extra panel later on, that way you're not fighting it and having to rip all that sealant back out. Now, one last thing. Since our system was kind of already in place and I popped it on, we did bypass a circuit breaker that used to be out on the front of the trailer tongue. And what they give you in the kit is just another 30 amp fuse holder. Our neighbor also purchased a different disconnect that they want in line here, so I'm not going to install this. Typically you would, and you'd want to put it pretty close to the battery, that way you're protecting it. But since we're getting something separate, I'm going to leave this off, and I'll get that other disconnect that they have installed to our solar power input from that over to our batteries. Now that we're plugged into shore power, we're able to see some stuff on our unit. If we take a quick look over here, we have our on and off button for our inverter and for our charger. So say you're at a spot where you're hooked up to shore power, but you don't want to charge the batteries because maybe you have too much of a draw as it is, you can turn that off so that function is no longer going. And then for the inverter, if you're boondocking and you don't want to use the inverter, so you're trying to save battery power, you can just come back here, hit that button, shut it right off. Now, the important thing here is we are not hooked up to AGM or lead acid or any of those battery types. We're hooked up to lithium now, so we want to make sure we go and change that. So we're going to use our arrow down, and we have shore power readings, unit readings, unit setup, and then remote settings. We're going to go down to unit setup, hit enter, and we are going to, and if you're looking at these, we got low battery cutout, so you can play around with your voltages and kind of set your settings how you want it. This is more for those people that are being very, very cautious with how much energy they're using and are really trying to watch it. So all those boondockers out there, these are settings you'll need. So basically it'll cut off power if you fall outside of those parameters that you set. Now with our battery type, we'll hit enter. We're going to be on custom. There's a few other options here as well. But for us, since we're using lithium, we want to go to custom. And then we're going to set our absorption at 14.4, enter, and then our float to 14.1, enter. For equalize, GoPower recommends anywhere from 12.7 up to 14.1, so we'll just leave it at 14.1. We'll hit enter, we're good to go. Now if you want to go through some other settings and kind of change things around, you can as well. We are going to go back to our remote settings. You can kind of check what model you're on if you need to update anything, if you're having any issues. And there's some other defaults and stuff that you can change around. But the cool thing about shore power, we can see what our voltage is coming in and change that if we need to. If we go down to our unit readings, this is where it's really helpful for those people that are trying to boondock. You can see what you're putting out and what's being put onto it as well. We can also see our battery temperature since we have our temp sensor put on. So here's our input with our AC. So right now we have 121 volts. We're only using 1.2 amps because right now all we're doing is just powering a couple lights, I believe. And that'll even tell you how many hertz you're using. Going out, we have, so that's out to any systems that we're using. We're not really pulling anything right now, so that's why it's showing that way. If you come back down some more, we got multi-stage for the DC side. So this is really allowing you to kind of see everything that you're using, so you can try and keep an eye on it while you're out, maybe at a regular site that you do have shore power out. You can maybe make a log, and then when you're trying to do those boondocking trips, you kind of already have a good idea of how much energy you're actually using so that you can prepare for it. So I kind of talked about this before, and this is something that we aren't going to end up installing just because our neighbor's trailer was already set up with a 30 amp solar controller, and it was enough for all the panels that we have. So I will go through kind of setting it to the correct battery type, but just to give you an overview, if you don't have that already and you are trying to get this installed, you can mount this the exact same way that we did with the inverter panel. The only difference is we have our solar in, so we have our, from the entry plate that we have on the roof, we have our positive and our negative connection, and those are just set screws. You would just push that bare wire in, tighten it down with that screw, and then we have our positive and our negative running out to our battery. So pretty simple. The hardest part of this install for this guy is going to be just running those wires if you don't already have them in there for you. But now that we've said that, we can look through and change out our battery type. So from the main screen, we can already see we're reading 13.1 volts, and right now the panels, even though we're inside, are still getting 15 volts from those and 75 for the degrees. So we're going to hit enter. We're going to hit enter down to SET, I guess, set. And then that's battery type once we hit enter again. And we can switch through once it's blinking. And we're going to go to LFP, so that's lithium iron phosphate, and that's going to be for our lithium batteries. We'll hit enter again, and it's set to that. We can go through and you can change some settings if you want to, just the same as what you saw on the inverter itself. You can go through and set cutoffs in case the voltage gets too low or too high, and then also just kind of get a general idea of how much is coming in and out, so you can see how much is going to it. Once we're outside, it's a little bit easier just because right now we're not really getting any sunlight, so it's not wanting to really kick over. So like, see, we're only getting 0.1 amp. So now I've disconnected from shore power. We can show you exactly how you'll turn your inverter on. So if you're in this situation where you don't have shore power, you just come to your control panel, you'll hit inverter on off, it'll power up, and you'll hear our microwave click in just a bit once power is reaching our panel. So running off of shore power, we can see we've got lights in our microwave. We've got lights right here showing that the display is working, and we can just put that on for a minute and just show that it is running off this. Now this is a 2000 watt inverter. Definitely want to check, make sure that your appliances that you're using are all going to be within that range. So if this is a 1000 watt microwave, we know I got probably a little bit less than 1000 watts I can really work with my other appliances that I have running in the camper. So if you are in that situation where you are using the inverter, make sure that you're really keeping track of everything so that way you don't overload the circuit. Well, I think that does it for today's look at and installation of GoPower's Solar Elite RV charging system here on our 2024 Jayco Jay Feather Travel trailer. My name's Kevin, and if this video wasn't helpful enough for you, or you still have questions about which solar panel and inverter kit is going to be the right one for your trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out.